Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 7, Day 10. Today will be the last day of our unit, and this will be the last journal, so make sure that you're keeping up with all of your journal assignments. If you've missed any, you can grab any of those at the beginning of the lectures. But please do make sure that you're getting those completed, as you will need to turn in your journal, vocab, and study guide, and your notes, all on the test day, which will not be tomorrow, but will be on after our study guide. Okay, so we will have Day 10, study guide, test. So you got 2 days till you'll need to have all of this completed. Today's journal is on what are some possible names you would give this era in time. It is labeled as the Gilded Age, but what other creative names could you designate? List at least 4 to 6 names. And then tell me, why was this period called the Gilded Age? All right, just talk about some things that we discussed in Day 9. Today we're going to continue finishing out this time period, talking about populism. Now, we're going to come back to this era just a little bit in Unit 8, but we're going to try to kind of set up Unit 8 and kind of put a stamp of ending on this period by going over a few of the presidents, etc., that we have not talked about. Now, who were the populists and what was their major focus as a party? That's kind of our emphasis today. Now, during this time, farmers were suffering. There's a huge decline in crop prices, despite the fact that there have been all these new inventions for new equipment. There's a huge argument over money and what we call bimetallism, which I don't have a whole lot in here for you about that information, but bimetallism is basically the argument of whether our country should be backed by gold or silver. And most people in our country believe that it should be one or the other, but we'll talk about that more here in a second. There are also tariffs on imports to encourage goods produced at home. And the idea here is that, if you're a farmer and you're growing something here, you don't want to be competing with a farm in England or somewhere else that is bringing in those foods into America and selling them at the same price you are, because it's hurting your bottom line. Now, farmers are very upset because their goods are very high priced, but they did not want to import farm produce. So they want tariffs on the farming goods, but they don't want tariffs on the goods that are here. And because of the tariffs, it allowed people to charge more for goods, etc., and it just turns into this wild problem with inflation. And eventually what's going to happen is what we call the Panic of 1893. And our country early in the 1890s goes into a bit of a depression when the stock market collapses as a result of a few businesses and a couple of the major railroads began to close and fail. Bank failures are going to follow right behind it, to the point that about 20% of the labor force is going to lose their jobs during this time period. Railroads essentially made up the bulk of the economy, and without the railroads, you don't have the transport system, which then in turn affects many, many other businesses. And the railroads are going to cause the whole country to suffer to the point that our country will not recover for another 8 years. Now, around about 1895, 1896, it begins to recover a little bit, but not completely. Now, Jacob S. Coxey was a populist, and he was a wealthy populist, and during this panic that's going on, he is going to start demanding that the government create jobs for the unemployed. And in 1894, he's even going to organize a march on Washington, trying to demand from the government that you need to help these people, you need to bail us out of the debt. And the problem is Congress just ignores him, and all of the unemployed workers who marched with him are ignored as well. Many of the people in the United States blamed Grover Cleveland for its economic problems, despite the fact that Harrison was responsible for quite a few of it. But Cleveland is, unfortunately, along with the Democrats, going to get blamed for much of the Depression going forward. Now, talked a little bit about deflation the other day. It's a prolonged period of dropping prices. All right, so inflation is a period of increasing prices because there's an increase in money. A deflation is a prolonged period of dropping prices because you cannot sell what you need. And this essentially is the same thing that happens during the Great Depression some 30 years later, is that folks didn't have the money to buy things, and so people continue to make things cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, which in turn is going to hurt other industries because they are not getting the same because the money's not being spent there, and the price is being driven down in other industries, which means other people aren't making as much money, which means they can't buy their product, which in turn forces them to lower their prices. And farmers depend on high prices of their crops to pay off the debts of the machinery and equipment and all the other things they had loaned. And during this time, our country's in a huge argument over the currency policy. And farmers are trying to push for a new silver policy where it would basically support farms and would give what they believed more money back into the economy. But unfortunately, they couldn't agree on what they were going to do, whether the money was going to be backed by gold, backed by silver, or in the case of what today's dollar is backed by public confidence. So the dollar that you have in your pocket today is not backed by any hard currency. It is backed by the fact that the public trusts that it has value. It's the public confidence. But during this time, citizens were very specific in that they wanted what they called specie, or hard currency, to back the dollar, specifically gold and silver. Now, farmers called for the free coinage of silver. They believed that the unlimited coining of silver would increase the money supply, and if we backed the dollar with silver, then it would in turn, if the government continued producing silver, it would in turn make it to where paper money was more valuable, and then there would be more money in the economy, which meant they could raise their prices back up on their crops. Farmers took to the streets. With the addition of new forms of communication, farmers were able to organize. You're also going to have these new groups starting to form in our country that are advocating for farmers as well. And Congress is eventually going to pass some acts to help coin more silver. Now, some things going on to help our farmers who are also very involved in what we'll get to eventually as the Populist Party, and that is the National Grange they formed. The National Grange was this nationwide organization for farmers, and the whole idea was to try to help farmers with new scientifically based practices, providing emergency aid to their farms, trying to show them how to produce more and consume less of their farms, so maximizing their profits. And it tried to unite farmers across the nation, and also try to get them to understand that some of these railroads and companies are exploiting them in order to take advantage of the fact of, that maybe it's the only railroad that you can use, or maybe this is the only place you can get equipment. And the National Grange is going to just go out of its way to try to help farmers. And then when we get to the 1880s, we're going to have what we call the Farmers Alliance. And it was a grassroots organization that, like the National Grange who helped farmers, tried to help cattle farmers. And they tried to fight against the thieving and fraudulent land claims that many of these cattle farmers struggled with, trying to get more land so that they could have more cattle, or trying to protect their cattle from being stolen and taken to market. The Farmers Alliance supported regulation of the railroad, which goes along with the National Grange. And they also believed in a greater circulation of currency, so more coinage of silver, things of that nature. State departments of agriculture, so the state would actually, regulate some of what went on in agriculture, as well as antitrust laws and farm credit. So antitrust laws would break up the businesses that are taking advantage of farmers who maybe, they've put everything into one trust, and so the farmers are having to deal with them in order to sell their produce, which in turn raises their prices, as well as farm credit, which would allow them to use the farm kind of as collateral or as a intermediary to get more money for their farm, or because they had a farm, being able to rent equipment on a credit because of their farm. You also had a Colored Farmers Alliance rising during this time, which is important just to note that African Americans are involved in not only trying to create businesses for themselves, but politics and trying to establish their part in the country as a response to all the prejudice, and showing that they are fighting for equality. And that's something that, as we're talking about all these things, I don't want to get lost, is that you do have this new group of people who are trying to find their way economically in our country. Now, getting to the actual Populist Party. And you'll understand why we've been talking about all these farmers, because the Populist Party was made up largely of farmers, but also of reformers and labor leaders who had all kind of been disjointed and tried to form one political party. They supported the National Grange and all the demands that the Farmers Alliance had made. And they believed in the adoption of an income tax, which would have helped farmers and would have hurt industrialists. So your industrialists who are making money and cash and don't have crop, they would have, like, the income that farmers are going to have, and their produce would be hurt less than what these industrialists who are on a much bigger scale, etc., than what these farmers are. The industrialists would have been hurt more by an income tax. They also wanted bank regulations, would have helped farmers with loans as well as others, and just trying to stabilize the banks, and the government ownership of railroads and telegraph companies, which would have established kind of a singular price for shipping things, rate schedules, etc., which we talked about some of that with the ICC and some of these different commissions that are being created to try to regulate railroads, but this is kind of what the Populist Party was pushing for. They were also pushing for the free coinage of silver, and silver would have raised prices in society, which would have in turn created more money for crops. Now, the Populists were very vocal in their campaigns. Their first candidate was James Weaver, who did not do well in the poll, but coming around to 1896, they have a new candidate in William Jennings Bryan, who is very vocal, very much speaks against the trust of our country, that they are bad and these big businesses need to be broken up. And he gives this what they call cross of gold speech, talking about that we don't need to put our societies back on gold, and that we need to coin more silver, put more money into society, stop making it to where only a few wealthy individuals have all the money. And he gets the nomination for the election, wins the West and the South, but doesn't capture the Midwest or Northern states, and ends up losing to William McKinley, a Republican, in the election of 1896. So the Populists had their candidate. The Democrats were hurting because of the panic and all the bad things that have gone on with Cleveland. And because he doesn't win one particular section, and the Democrats won that section away from him, William Jennings Bryan ends up losing the election. William McKinley is elected, and he has the support of all of the big businessmen of the age. Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, they're all pushing William McKinley because they want to be able to keep doing business the same way that they have been. And William Jennings Bryan is going to be this, he's kind of the anti-Carnegie or the anti-Rockefeller. He's going to be against all of what they stand for as businessmen, even though what they stand for may be illegal now in today's society, but regardless, that was the deal. So here are your vocabulary words. These are your last 5 words for the day. I do want to make mention, don't worry about gold bugs, silverites, or free silver. So those 3 vocabulary words, don't even worry about writing those down. I took gold bugs and silverites off because I want to take a little bit of information off the slides. It was already long enough. But make sure you get Farmers Alliance down and William Jennings Bryan. Those are 2 that are important. Okay, and that is all that we have for you today. If you want to go look up something interesting in your free time, go look up The Wizard of Oz and populism, and you'll actually see how a lot of the characters and symbolism in The Wizard of Oz was actually based on a populist idea and the ideas of populism. It's just kind of really neat, all the correlations that they have there. But you can check that out. Otherwise, you are done with this unit. You just need to make sure that you got your journal, vocab, and study guide done, and then make sure you get that study guide done before your test tomorrow, or your study guide for tomorrow, and then your test the next day. All right? If you have any questions, please email me. Otherwise, I'll talk to you soon.